My fiancé deceived me, scheming to steal my family's company. But the day he thought he won became the day his downfall began. The night before my wedding, I couldn't sleep. Excitement, nerves, and the overwhelming weight of forever rested on my shoulders. I walked through the grand halls of my family's estate, thinking about how my life was about to change. But fate had a cruel way of revealing the truth. Just past midnight, I heard laughter coming from the terrace. Garrett's voice, casual and cocky, echoed through the quiet night. Amelia? She's just a stepping stone. Once her father's out of the picture, the company will be mine. Some lessons come hard, but they shape who we become. If you believe in strength, resilience, and taking control of your story, subscribe. It's free and keeps you connected to more empowering stories. Let's begin. My breath hitched, my heart pounded, and in that moment, love turned to ice. I stood frozen, my entire future crumbling before me. But if he thought he had won, he was wrong. The next day, I walked down the aisle wearing the dress, the ring, and the smile of a bride. But I wasn't there to say I do. I was there to give him a wedding he'd never forget. I had spent months believing in a future that was never real. Garrett had played the perfect role. Devoted, thoughtful, always knowing the right words to say. When he proposed, it felt like a dream, the way he got down on one knee, the way he looked at me as if I was his whole world. It was all an illusion, carefully crafted to draw me in. In hindsight, the signs were there, the way he always seemed more interested in my father's business conversations than in our personal moments, how he never asked about my dreams but always spoke of our power couple future. I had brushed off the doubts, convincing myself they were nothing. Love, I thought, was about trust, but trust, when placed in the wrong hands, becomes a weapon. I should have seen it, the small remarks, the too perfect answers, the way his gaze would linger just a second too long when my father spoke about his empire. I remembered the time we were at a gala, surrounded by industry leaders. When my father had spoken about expansion plans, Garrett had leaned in, his voice low but eager. You should consider diversifying. If we control multiple markets, we'll be unstoppable. We, as if he was already part of the equation. My father had given him a measured look, a subtle warning in his eyes, but I had laughed it off, believing it was just enthusiasm. Then there were the questions, always about assets, investments, properties. Never about my favorite books, never about the childhood stories I had shared with him, hoping he'd care about more than just what I owned. Your father's estate is impressive. Ever thought about restructuring it? If we invested in international markets, your family's company could double in value. We should set up private accounts together. Financial security is key in marriage. At the time, they had seemed like harmless curiosities. Now they felt like rehearsed lines from a man who had been playing the long game all along. My father had never been the overprotective type. He had always trusted my judgment. But there was something in his demeanor whenever Garrett was around, something I had failed to see before. He's charming, my father had said once, after a dinner where Garrett had seamlessly worked his way into conversations about our company. That's a good thing, right? I had asked, sipping my wine, oblivious to the undertone in my father's voice. Charm without depth is nothing more than a well-polished lie, he had replied. I had dismissed it then, chalking it up to parental protectiveness. But standing there on the terrace that night, hearing Garrett's words slice through the quiet like a blade, I finally understood. My father had seen what I had refused to. Garrett hadn't fallen in love with me. He had fallen in love with the empire he thought he would inherit. I gripped my phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The recording was clear, Garrett's voice, his arrogant laughter, the cruel certainty in his tone. Once her father's out of the picture, the company will be mine. Out of the picture. Those words sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just greed, it was entitlement. He wasn't just planning to enjoy the wealth I had been born into. He was waiting for my father to be gone, assuming that everything would fall into his hands. He had no idea that I had heard everything. I backed away from the terrace, my heart hammering in my chest. The wedding was just hours away. The invitations had been sent, the venue had been prepared, the dress was waiting in my room. Canceling everything would be simple. A single phone call, and it would all be over. But no. This couldn't end with a quiet breakup, not after what I had heard. He had played his role so well, believing he had already won. I needed to make sure he lost. I walked straight to my father's room, my mind racing, my hands trembling. He was awake, seated in his chair with a book in his hands. He looked up the moment I entered. What's wrong? I couldn't speak. Instead, I pressed play. Garrett's voice filled the room. The moment it ended, silence stretched between us. Then my father exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. I see, he murmured, setting his book aside. What do we do? I whispered, my voice barely holding steady. He looked at me for a long moment, then stood. We give him exactly what he wants. I frowned. What? We go ahead with the wedding, he said simply. Dad, I can't. No, he interrupted gently. You won't be marrying him, but you'll be walking down that aisle. And when you do, we'll make sure every single person in that room sees him for who he truly is. A slow realization crept over me. My father wasn't suggesting we ignore the betrayal. He was suggesting something else entirely, something bigger, something public. The exposure would be absolute. The humiliation would be undeniable. And the best part? Garrett would never see it coming. I swallowed, a new kind of determination settling into my bones. The heartbreak was still there, the ache of deception still raw, but it was quickly being replaced by something stronger. If Garrett Hughes thought he had won, he was about to learn the most valuable lesson of his life. This wedding wouldn't be the beginning of his empire. It would be the end of it. And I would make sure of that. This establishes how deep Garrett's deception ran and how long he had been planning it. It highlights Amelia's gradual realization of the truth, a slow, painful awakening rather than an instant reaction. It showcases her father's wisdom and ability to turn the tables without rash decisions. It ends with a strong emotional shift, from heartbreak to determination, leading perfectly into the next phase, the plan for revenge. I stared at my father, his words settling deep into my bones. We weren't going to call off the wedding. We were going to turn it into Garrett's downfall. A slow, measured breath steadied me as I processed what this meant. I wouldn't run. I wouldn't let him get away with this. He had planned his deceptions so carefully, ensuring that I never suspected a thing. But now, he was the one being played. He was walking straight into a trap, and he wouldn't realize it until it was far too late. My father reached for his phone, his expression unreadable. The weight of his years in business reflected in his quiet resolve. We'll need to make a few adjustments, he murmured. But first, you need to be sure, Amelia. If we go through with this, there's no turning back. I met his gaze, my hands clenched at my sides. I'm sure. His nod was all the confirmation I needed. He turned, placing a call to someone I couldn't hear. I sat in silence, letting the storm inside me settle into something sharper, more focused. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. This was clarity. The wedding would happen, and Garrett Hughes was about to receive the shock of his life. I hardly slept that night, though exhaustion weighed on me. My mind replayed every moment with Garrett, every whispered promise, every carefully placed lie. I had been nothing more than a means to an end to him, a stepping stone toward the power he craved. By morning, the house was alive with movement. My father had arranged for subtle but significant changes. Guest lists were revised, media contacts were notified, and certain business associates were personally invited. Lena was one of the few people who knew the truth, and when she arrived early, she pulled me aside immediately. "Are you okay?" she asked, her eyes scanning my face, searching for any cracks in my resolve. I gave a small nod. "I will be." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't push. She knew me well enough to understand that once my mind was set, nothing could change it. "You know," she said after a moment, "he's still acting like nothing's wrong." I saw him outside earlier, laughing with his friends like this is just another day. A bitter taste coated my tongue. Of course he was. He had no idea what was coming. I forced a breath, straightening my shoulders. "Let's get ready. We have a wedding to attend." The bridal suite was filled with people, stylists, assistants, designers making last-minute adjustments. The gown, a masterpiece of lace and silk, had been carefully chosen months ago. I'd once imagined stepping into it with joy, believing that it marked the beginning of a beautiful future. Now it felt like armor. The moment the dress settled over my skin, something inside me solidified. I looked at myself in the mirror, seeing not a bride but a woman with a purpose. Lena stood beside me, adjusting my veil. "You look perfect," she murmured. I met her gaze in the reflection. "Good," I said softly, "because he won't see this coming." The ceremony was scheduled for midday. Garrett had insisted on an early event, saying it would allow us to celebrate longer. Now I realized why. He wanted it finalized as soon as possible. He was eager to secure his position, to solidify his claim over what he thought would soon be his. As the time drew closer, I remained composed, my expression calm. I walked through the halls of the estate, aware of the guests arriving, the hum of excitement in the air. My father was waiting near the entrance, his suit immaculate, his demeanor unreadable. He offered his arm as I approached. "Ready?" I nodded, slipping my hand through his. More than ever. Together we stepped outside. The ceremony area was breathtaking, white roses, golden accents, an aisle that stretched before me like a path to the inevitable. Guests rose as I appeared, their eyes shining with admiration. But I barely saw them. I saw Garrett. He stood at the altar, his suit crisp, his smile confident. He looked at me with the same adoring expression he had perfected over the months, the one that had once made me feel cherished. Now it made me feel sick. As I walked toward him, I didn't falter. I played the role he expected, the devoted bride, the woman who still believed in his illusion. The air was thick with anticipation, every detail carefully arranged. And then I was there, standing before him, the world watching. The officiant cleared his throat. "We are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Amelia Carter and Garrett Hughes." I tuned him out, my gaze locked on Garrett's. He had no idea that this was the last moment he would ever feel in control. The words continued, a blur of formalities. I barely noticed. My pulse remained steady, my resolve unshaken. And then the moment arrived. "Do you, Garrett Hughes, take Amelia Carter to be your lawfully wedded wife?" I saw the exact moment he believed he had won. His shoulders squared, his chin lifted slightly, his fingers curled in anticipation. "I do," he said, his voice smooth, self-assured. The officiant turned to me. "And do you, Amelia Carter, take Garrett Hughes to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Silence stretched, a breath of a second. I smiled, then slowly, deliberately, I turned my head, looking out toward the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady, clear, carrying across the venue. "Before I answer that, there's something all of you should hear." I reached into the folds of my gown and withdrew a small remote. Garrett's expression barely had time to shift before I pressed the button. A loud click, and then his own voice played over the speakers for every single person in attendance to hear. "Amelia? She's just a stepping stone. Once her father's out of the picture, the company will be mine." The reaction was instant. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers broke out in waves of shock. Heads turned toward Garrett, eyes wide with disbelief. He froze. I watched it happen, the realization creeping over him like a shadow. A second ago, he had been victorious. Now his entire world was crumbling around him. He turned to me, his face pale. "Amelia, Save it, I interrupted smoothly, my voice calm. You already said everything that matters. His hands trembled at his sides, his breathing shallow. You don't understand. No, Garrett, I said, my voice sharp as steel. I understand perfectly. I stepped back, lifting my gaze to the guests, to my father, everyone who had come believing this was a celebration. I was supposed to marry a man who loved me, I said, my voice unwavering. Instead, I almost married a man who only loved power. The whispers had grown louder, murmurs of disbelief shifting into disgust. I reached for my ring, slipping it off my finger. Then, with deliberate finality, I let it fall. It landed at Garrett's feet with a quiet, resounding clink. The silence that followed was deafening. Garrett's entire world had just collapsed in front of everyone he had ever wanted to impress, and the wedding he had been so desperate for had just become the biggest mistake of his life. The ring lay at Garrett's feet, a stark symbol of everything he had lost. A hush had fallen over the venue, the weight of the moment pressing down on every guest. Faces that had once looked at him with admiration were now laced with disbelief, disappointment, and, in some cases, pure disgust. The whispers had evolved into murmurs of outrage, spreading like wildfire through the seated guests. Garrett's body was rigid, his hands clenching and unclenching, as his mind scrambled for a way out. His carefully crafted image, the reputation he had so meticulously built, was shattering right before his eyes. The realization hit him all at once. He was exposed. The wedding, the business empire he thought he was moments away from controlling, had slipped right through his fingers. I remained poised, standing tall beside my father, who watched Garrett with a calm, almost amused expression. Richard Carter had seen men like him before, calculating, power-hungry, blinded by ambition. And like all those before him, Garrett had underestimated the one thing that could truly destroy him: the truth. Amelia. Garrett's voice was hoarse, desperate. He reached for my hand, but I stepped back without hesitation. His fingers curled in midair before dropping to his sides. Please, let me explain. You already did, I said coldly, tilting my head toward the speakers. In your own words. For everyone to hear. His face twisted, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. That was just talk. A joke. A joke? I cut him off, my voice sharp enough to slice through his weak defense. You laughed while planning how you'd take over my father's business. How you'd use me as a stepping stone. Tell me, Garrett, what part of that was funny? He opened his mouth, but no words came. He had nothing, no carefully crafted excuse, no last charm to salvage the mess he had created. Richard took a slow step forward, his presence commanding the attention of the room. Garrett, he said, his voice smooth yet unwavering. You thought you were playing a game, manipulating your way into my family. But you should know something about business. He paused, letting the silence build before delivering the blow. A man who cannot be trusted is a man who will never hold power. Garrett flinched. Around us, his family sat stiffly, his mother's face paled as she avoided his gaze. His father looked livid, his jaw clenched so tightly it seemed he was holding himself back from speaking. Whatever standing Garrett had within his own circle was crumbling just as quickly as it had with mine. You think you can just do this to me? Garrett's voice rose, his frustration breaking through. You planned this. You humiliated me in front of everyone. I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. You humiliated yourself the moment you decided to play a role instead of being honest. The only difference is that now, everyone knows the truth. His chest rose and fell heavily, anger seeping through his carefully controlled mask. For the first time, he wasn't the man in charge. He wasn't the one dictating the situation. He had lost. One of my father's business partners, an older man seated near the front, cleared his throat. Garrett, I had considered investing in your future ventures, but now that I've seen your true character, I can't risk aligning with someone so unreliable. The murmurs from the other business associates confirmed it. Garrett's future in the industry had taken a critical hit. Investors, partners, people who could have opened doors for him, were walking away. Garrett turned to his family, his last hope. Dad, he pleaded, but his father shook his head, standing abruptly without a word. He motioned for his wife, and together they exited the venue. Their disapproval, though silent, was deafening. Panic flickered in Garrett's eyes as he watched them leave, realization sinking in that he was truly alone in this. He turned back to me, desperation creeping into his voice. Amelia, please, we can fix this. We don't have to let this ruin everything. I met his gaze with an unshaken resolve. You were never going to have me, Garrett. And now, you have nothing. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, grasping at the remnants of his pride. But there was nothing left to hold on to. He had built everything on lies, and now he was watching it all collapse. I took one last look at him before turning away, my father by my side. As we walked down the aisle, this time not toward a future built on deception, but toward the life I deserved, the guests slowly followed. Some murmured among themselves. Others simply shook their heads at the spectacle that had unfolded. Lena caught up to me outside, her face alight with admiration. That, she breathed, was legendary. I exhaled, finally feeling the weight of the moment settle in. It was necessary. She nudged me playfully. Still, you have to admit, it was satisfying. A small smile tugged at the corner of my lips, the first real one I had felt in days. It was. The drive back to the estate was quiet, the adrenaline slowly fading. My father, ever composed, glanced at me as we pulled up the long driveway. You handled that well. I let out a slow breath. It wasn't easy. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. But it was right. I turned to him, the question I had been holding back finally slipping out. Did you ever think this would happen? He considered for a moment before answering. I hoped I was wrong about him. But I knew you'd figure it out when the time was right. A lump formed in my throat at the certainty in his voice. My father had always trusted me, even when I hadn't trusted myself. Inside, I changed out of the gown, feeling lighter the moment it was off my shoulders. The dress, once a symbol of love and commitment, was now just fabric, beautiful but meaningless. I sat by the window watching the sky shift into the warm hues of dusk. The day hadn't gone as planned, but maybe that was a good thing. I had seen the truth before it was too late. I had taken control when I could have been controlled. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Lena peeked inside. "Hey, you okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." She walked in, sinking into the chair across from me. "So, what now? What's next for Amelia Carter?" I looked out at the horizon, the possibilities stretching before me. Whatever I want, and for the first time in a long while, that felt like freedom. Garrett Hughes had walked into my life thinking he could write my future, but in the end, I had written my own, and he would never forget it. The weight of the day settled on me as I stared out the window. The sky had dimmed into soft amber hues, the day slipping away like a chapter closing in a book. The house was quieter now, the chaos of the ruined wedding fading into the past. Yet the echoes of what had happened still lingered. The gasps, the whispers, the look on Garrett's face when the truth shattered his perfectly constructed reality. Lena sat beside me, her expression unreadable as she twirled a bracelet around her wrist. "I keep replaying it in my head," she admitted. "The moment you dropped that ring, it was like watching a movie. I swear, if I hadn't been there, I'd think it was scripted." I let out a breath, the tension still sitting heavy on my chest. "It wasn't just a scene. It was my life," I murmured. "A life I almost gave to the wrong person." She nodded, her gaze flicking to me. "And now?" I thought about that for a moment. What now? That was the question, wasn't it? The wedding was over. Garrett was out of my life, but the impact of his betrayal still lingered like an unwelcome guest. "Now," I said slowly, "I start again." Lena gave me a small smile, but before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. I turned, surprised to see my father standing in the doorway. "Can I steal you for a moment?" he asked. I glanced at Lena, who waved me off. "Go, I'll be here." I followed my father down the hallway, the polished floors gleaming under the soft glow of the chandelier. He led me to his study, a room filled with history, bookshelves lined with years of knowledge, a grand wooden desk that had been the center of many important decisions. He gestured for me to sit, then leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "How are you holding up?" I gave a small shrug. "Honestly, I don't know yet." He studied me for a moment before nodding. "That's fair." He paused. "But you did well today." I blinked at him, unsure how to respond. "I did well?" He smiled faintly. "You could have let this break you. Instead, you stood your ground. You took control of the situation and didn't let him walk away with a shred of power." I swallowed, his words sinking in. "I guess I just didn't want to be the victim." "You weren't," he assured me. "You were the one writing the story." A small silence stretched between us, filled only by the distant ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, he exhaled and straightened. "I wanted to tell you something. Garrett came to see me before he left." I stiffened. "What?" "He wanted to talk. Thought he could salvage something. Maybe convince me to reconsider the business ties he thought he had." I let out a humorless laugh. "And what did you say?" My father's gaze didn't waver. I told him the only way he'd be stepping into my office again is if he was delivering a package. That was enough to send a genuine laugh out of me. "That bad, huh?" He smirked. "Worse." I sobered slightly. "He won't stop, you know. People like him, they don't just give up. He'll try something else. Maybe not with me, but with someone else." My father's expression darkened slightly. "Then let that be someone else's lesson. He has no place here anymore." I nodded, a quiet agreement passing between us. As I rose from my seat, he spoke again. "You know, Amelia, I always trusted you to make the right decision, and today you proved me right." I looked at him, emotions stirring in my chest. "Thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't see it myself." His eyes softened, and he gave me a slight nod. Before I left the study, back in my room, Lena was lounging on my bed, scrolling through her phone. "You made the news, by the way." I groaned, rubbing my temples. "Please tell me it's not as bad as it sounds." "Oh, it's worse," she teased. "Social media is calling it the wedding of the year, for all the wrong reasons." I sat beside her, peering over her shoulder. Articles were popping up, headlines flashing with dramatic titles. "Runaway groom exposed at the altar." "Billionaire's daughter turns wedding into a public trial." "Cold feet or cold revenge?" I sighed. "Great." Lena grinned. "Hey, at least you're not the villain. People are loving the fact that you called him out." I rolled my eyes, leaning back against the pillows. "I didn't do it for an audience." "Doesn't matter," she shrugged. "People love a good story." "And you just gave them one." I closed my eyes for a moment, exhaustion creeping in. The adrenaline that had fueled me all day was finally wearing off, leaving me feeling drained. Lena's voice was softer when she spoke next. "So, what now?" It was the second time I'd been asked that question today, and yet I still didn't have a perfect answer. "I don't know," I admitted. "But for the first time, that doesn't scare me." Lena smiled, nudging my arm. "Well, that's something." I glanced at the clock. It was getting late, the day stretching toward its end. Tomorrow, things would be different. The world would move on, the headlines would fade, and Garrett would be nothing more than a footnote in my past. For now, that was enough. As I lay there, the events of the day replayed in my mind, but this time, there was no anger, no heartbreak, just relief. The wedding was over, but my story was just beginning. The night had fallen, wrapping my family estate in a calmness that sharply contrasted with the chaos of the day. The headlines were still swirling, and the weight of the exposure still hung heavy in the air. Garrett had been publicly unmasked, his ambitions turned against him in the most humiliating way possible. Yet I knew that while the world might move on, he wouldn't. People like Garrett didn't just accept defeat. They didn't quietly disappear into the shadows. They tried to regain control, clawing at any remnants of power they could salvage, and I was prepared for that. I sat on my bed, scrolling through messages, some from family, some from strangers who had witnessed the spectacle online. Most were supportive, some were in shock. But a few stood out. Garrett's close associates sending cryptic messages like, "We need to talk, this isn't over." Of course it wasn't. I had taken everything from him in one swift, calculated move. There was no way he would simply walk away. A sharp knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. I expected Lena, but when I opened it, my father stood there instead. His expression was unreadable, but the subtle tension in his posture told me he had something important to say. "May I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. He walked in slowly, glancing around as if choosing his words carefully before turning to face me. I received an interesting call. I crossed my arms. "From Garrett?" I exhaled sharply, unsurprised but irritated nonetheless. "Let me guess, he's trying to salvage whatever he can." My father nodded, though there was a flicker of something else in his expression. He wasn't just looking for a way back in, Amelia. He was desperate. Desperate. The word settled heavily between us. Garrett had always been smooth, calculated, careful with his image. Desperation meant he was losing in more than just his pride. "What did he say?" I asked, my voice even. "He claims it was all a misunderstanding," my father said, a trace of amusement in his tone. "That he was pressured by his friends to say those things. That he never actually meant them." He paused, "And he begged me to convince you to meet with him." I scoffed, shaking my head. "He must really think I'm that naive." My father observed me for a long moment before asking, "What do you want to do?" It was a simple question, but it carried so much weight. What did I want? Revenge had been served, the truth was out, and Garrett's downfall had been swift. But something inside me knew this wasn't the last move in the game. He had lost everything he thought he was entitled to, and now he was grasping at whatever scraps remained. "Let's meet him," I said finally, my voice steady, but on my terms. The next evening, I arrived at a quiet private restaurant, one that my family owned, ensuring complete discretion. Garrett was already there, seated at a table tucked in the corner, his fingers drumming against the polished wood. When he saw me enter, he straightened, his eyes scanning my face for any sign of weakness. I gave him none. I took my seat across from him, keeping my expression unreadable. "Amelia," he started, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. I raised a hand, cutting him off. "Before you say anything, let me make one thing clear. I'm not here for apologies. And I'm certainly not here to undo what's been done." He swallowed, his jaw tightening. "Then why are you here?" I tilted my head, studying him. "Because I wanted to see what a desperate man looks like." His nostrils flared, but he quickly masked his emotions. "I made a mistake," he said, leaning forward. "I got caught up in the business world, in ambition, and I lost sight of what mattered." I almost laughed. His performance was impeccable, just as it had always been. But the problem with rehearsed lies was that they lacked true depth. "There was never an us, Garrett," I said, my voice devoid of warmth. "There was only what you thought you could take from me." His fingers curled into fists on the table. "I cared about you." "No," I corrected. "You cared about control. And now that you've lost it, you're trying to regain whatever you can." He exhaled sharply, frustration evident. "What do you want me to say, Amelia? That I was wrong? That I regret everything?" I met his gaze head on. "I don't want you to say anything. I want you to live with the consequences of your actions." His eyes darkened, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second. "And what if I don't?" It was a veiled threat, but I didn't flinch. "Then you'll lose even more than you already have." A tense silence settled between us. Finally, he exhaled, shaking his head. "You really are your father's daughter." I smiled, a sharp contrast to the tension in the air. "You should have realized that before you tried to deceive me." He leaned back in his chair, accepting defeat. But something in his expression told me he wasn't done. Not yet. I stood, placing my hands on the table as I leaned in slightly. "Enjoy your new reality, Garrett," I murmured. "And if you ever try to manipulate someone like this again, remember, some people aren't as forgiving as I am." His eyes flickered with something unreadable, but I didn't give him the chance to respond. I turned and walked out, feeling the weight of his gaze on my back. Later that night, Lena was waiting for me at my place, arms crossed. "Well?" she asked as I dropped my purse onto the table inside. "He's not letting this go easily," I said, flopping onto the couch. She groaned. "Of course he's not. But it doesn't matter," I continued. "He has no power left, and he knows it." She raised an eyebrow. "Then why do you look like something's still bothering you?" I hesitated. "Because I know him. He's going to try something. I don't know what yet, but he won't accept losing just like that." Lena sat beside me, her tone cautious. "Do you think he's dangerous?" I thought about it, about the look in his eyes before I walked away. He wasn't reckless. His whole life was built on careful planning. But desperation changed people. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'm not going to let my guard down." Lena nodded, sensing the seriousness in my voice. "Good." Silence stretched between us before she added, "But hey, if he tries anything, just remember, he's already lost the most important thing." I turned to her, my curiosity piqued. "Which is?" She smirked. "The privilege of ever being in your life again." A slow smile formed on my lips. She was right. Garrett's biggest loss wasn't just the company, the reputation, or the business ties. It was me, and that was a loss he would never recover from. The moment I stepped away from my meeting with Garrett, I felt a strange sense of finality. His desperation had been evident, his frustration barely contained. But more than anything, I had seen something else in his eyes. Defeat. He had lost everything, and no amount of charming words or calculated apologies would change that. Still, a part of me remained wary. People like Garrett didn't accept failure easily. He had spent years building an image of success, carefully molding himself into someone admired, respected, and, above all, powerful. That had been stripped away in a single day, and I knew that a man like him wouldn't disappear quietly. As I left the restaurant, I checked my phone. Dozens of missed calls, unread messages, and social media notifications flooded the screen. The fallout of what had happened at the wedding was still spreading, and Garrett's downfall had turned into a spectacle that no one could look away from. Lena had been right. It had become a story people were obsessed with. The headlines hadn't died down. If anything, they had gained even more traction. Garrett Hughes, from groom to disgraced opportunist. Billionaire's daughter turns wedding into a public trial. His name was everywhere, but for all the wrong reasons. By the time I arrived home, my father was waiting in the study, his phone in his hand. He gestured for me to sit, his expression unreadable. "I assume your meeting with Garrett went as expected?" I nodded, placing my bag down. He tried to talk his way out of it, but he knows it's over. My father exhaled, setting his phone on the desk. "It's worse than I expected." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He turned the screen toward me, and I immediately understood. Multiple emails, forwarded messages, and calls from business partners, investors, and board members were flooding his inbox. They weren't just cutting ties with Garrett. They were making sure his entire reputation was erased from the industry. "He tried reaching out to a few of my contacts today," my father continued. "No one will take his calls. His company's stock is plummeting, and his father has officially distanced himself from him." I absorbed the information, the weight of it settling in. Garrett had been exposed, and now the world was responding accordingly. It wasn't just about me anymore. His entire career was crumbling. "This is more than just a public embarrassment," my father said, leaning back. "He's losing everything, and that makes him unpredictable." I knew what he was implying. When someone like Garrett was cornered, they became dangerous. Not in the physical sense, Garrett wasn't reckless enough for that, but in ways that could still cause damage. "Then we stay ahead of him," I said simply. My father gave a slight nod. "That's exactly what I was thinking." The next morning, my inbox was flooded with interview requests, journalists, talk show hosts, even social media influencers. They wanted a statement from me. They wanted my side of the story, my thoughts on Garrett's deception, and, most of all, a quote that would add fuel to the already blazing fire. I ignored them all. Lena, on the other hand, was having far too much fun with it. "You have no idea how iconic this is," she said, flopping onto my couch with her phone in hand. "You took down a guy who thought he was untouchable. People love this kind of thing." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "I didn't do it for attention." She grinned. "Yeah, but you did it in the most dramatic way possible. That's why it's blowing up." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't deny the truth in her words. The way it had unfolded, the ceremony, the confession, the exposure, had been like something out of a movie, and people couldn't look away. But there was something else I couldn't shake. Garrett had been arrogant, but he wasn't foolish. He had built himself up carefully over the years, ensuring that he was always in a position of control. Losing it all so suddenly wouldn't just send him into hiding. It would force him to retaliate. And I needed to be ready for that. A week passed, and things began to settle. The media frenzy started shifting to news stories, and my life gradually returned to normal. Garrett had seemingly disappeared from the public eye, no statements, no social media posts, nothing. But that didn't mean he was gone. One evening, as I sat in my father's study reviewing some reports for the company, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I debated ignoring it, but something told me to pick up. I answered cautiously. "Hello?" A deep breath came from the other end, followed by a voice I hadn't expected. "Amelia?" "Garrett." I immediately stiffened. "What do you want?" He hesitated, as if carefully choosing his words. "You've made your point," I scoffed. "Have I?" There was a pause before he continued. "You got what you wanted. You ruined me. And now everyone's turning their backs on me." I leaned back in my chair, my fingers drumming against the desk. "I didn't ruin you, Garrett. You did that yourself." His breath came out sharp. "Is that what you think?" "It's what I know." Another pause. Then, softer. "You could have just walked away." I let out a humorless laugh. "And let you continue manipulating your way through life?" "No, Garrett. You needed to be stopped." Silence stretched between us, thick with tension. Finally he spoke again, his voice quieter. "You never really loved me, did you?" The question caught me off guard, but I didn't hesitate. "I loved the version of you that I thought was real. But that person never existed, did he?" His lack of response told me everything I needed to know. I exhaled slowly. "This is the last time we talk, Garrett. I'm moving on, and you should too." Before he could say another word, I ended the call. I stared at my phone for a long moment, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. Relief, closure, and something else. Something I couldn't quite name. But I knew one thing for certain. Garrett Hughes was nothing more than a lesson now. A lesson that I would never forget, and neither would he. As I stared at my phone, the silence after Garrett's final words lingered in the air like an unfinished sentence. I had ended the call, severing the last thread that connected us. There was no lingering doubt, no second thoughts. Garrett Hughes was now a relic of my past, a name that once held meaning but now carried nothing but a cautionary tale. I placed my phone on the desk and leaned back in my chair, inhaling deeply. Lena had been right. His greatest loss wasn't the business deals, the reputation, or even his father's approval. It was me. He had gambled everything on a future that was never his to claim, and now he had nothing left. But that didn't mean I could relax just yet. Garrett wasn't the type to accept his downfall with grace. I had seen the flicker of defiance in his voice, the way he had asked if I'd ever loved him. That wasn't just regret, it was the beginning of something else. A man who had lost everything was unpredictable, and while I had already won the war, I wasn't about to ignore the possibility of lingering battles. I pushed the thought aside for the moment and left my study, finding Lena sprawled on the couch, flipping through the news on her phone. She glanced up as I entered. "So?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I sighed. "He called." Her eyes widened. "And?" "He tried to make it sound like I'd ruined him, like he was the victim," I said, shaking my head. "But he wasn't apologizing. He was looking for a way to crawl back." Lena rolled her eyes. Classic Garrett. "So what did you tell him?" "I told him it was over for good." A slow smirk spread across her lips. "I'd pay money to see his face when you said that." I chuckled, the tension in my shoulders easing slightly. "Yeah, well, something tells me he won't stay down for long." She sat up, serious now. "Do you think he'll try something?" I hesitated before answering. "Not yet. He's too focused on the fallout right now. But eventually?" "Maybe." Lena's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen before grimacing. "Speaking of fallout, you should probably see this." She handed me her phone, and my stomach clenched as I read the headline. "Former rising star Garrett Hughes officially cut from family business. Hughes Enterprises severs all ties." I skimmed the article, my eyes catching key phrases: indefinite separation, irreparable damage to reputation, financial instability. Garrett's father had done the one thing he had always feared. He had cut him off completely. "He's lost his safety net," Lena said quietly, watching my expression. "No business, no investments, no inheritance. He's got nothing left." I handed the phone back, my mind racing. "That's exactly why we need to be careful," Lena frowned. "You think he'll retaliate?" I exhaled slowly. "I think Garrett is the type of person who doesn't know how to function without power. And now that he's lost all of it, he's either going to disappear, or he's going to try and take something back." Her jaw tightened. "So what do we do?" I met her gaze, my decision already made. We stay ahead of him. For the next few days, I kept a close eye on everything. News updates, social media mentions, even whispers from mutual acquaintances. Garrett had gone silent. No public statements, no attempts to repair his image, no desperate pleas for sympathy. It was unsettling. Then, on the third morning, my father called me into his office. "Garrett contacted the board of Carter Industries," he said, his expression unreadable. I stiffened. "What?" "He tried to convince them that I had orchestrated a smear campaign against him," my father continued, "that we had planned to ruin his career before the wedding even happened." My hands curled into fists, and he gave a slight, approving nod. They didn't believe him, of course. He has no credibility left, but it tells me that he's not done yet. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. "He's looking for an opening." "Yes," my father agreed. "And we're not going to give him one." I met his gaze, my resolve strengthening. "What's the plan?" That evening, I had a private meeting with my father and his most trusted advisors. The goal was simple: ensure that Garrett had no path to redemption through manipulation. We reviewed every possible angle he could take: legal battles, public relations stunts, even last-ditch attempts at emotional blackmail. Each possibility was met with a countermeasure. By the time the meeting ended, it was clear Garrett had nowhere left to go. But I still wasn't satisfied. As I walked through the halls of my family's estate later that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Garrett had always been ambitious, strategic. Even now, with everything crumbling around him, I knew he wasn't sitting idly by. And I was right. Because the next morning, I received an email from Garrett Hughes. Subject: one last conversation. I stared at the screen, my heartbeat steady. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I took a breath, my mind analyzing every possible reason he could be reaching out. Was this another attempt to salvage what was left? A final plea for reconciliation? Or something else entirely? Lena walked in, noticing my expression. "What's wrong?" I turned the screen toward her. Her eyebrows shot up. "Oh no. No way. Whatever that is, delete it." I shook my head. "I need to see what he wants." She groaned but didn't argue. As I clicked the email open, "Amelia, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to respond. But you should know that everything I built is gone. Everything I worked for, taken away. You were right, I did this to myself. And now I have to live with it. But before I disappear from your life completely, I just need you to answer one question. Did I ever mean anything to you even for a moment? That's all I need to know. After that, you'll never hear from me again." Garrett. Lena scoffed. Wow. So now he's playing the lost soul act. Unbelievable. I tapped my fingers against the desk, rereading his words. It was different from his usual manipulative charm. There was no angle here, no hidden agenda, just a question. I inhaled deeply before typing my response. "Garrett, there was a time when you meant everything to me. But that was before I knew who you really were, before I saw the truth. I don't hate you. I don't pity you, but I will never regret walking away. Goodbye, Amelia." I hit send. And just like that, it was over. Lena let out a low whistle. "You're stronger than me." I wouldn't have answered at all. I shrugged. I needed the closure. She nodded, studying me for a moment. "So what now?" I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Now, I finally move on, and I meant it. Garrett Hughes was nothing more than a fading memory. His ruin had been his own doing, and now he would have to live with the consequences. But I wouldn't be looking back. My future was mine again, and this time, I was choosing it for myself. Hitting send on that final email had felt like closing a heavy door, one that had remained slightly ajar, allowing Garrett's presence to linger even when I had already moved forward. But now there was no lingering, no unfinished business, no unresolved emotions. Just a single undeniable truth. I was free. Lena watched me closely, her phone resting in her lap. "So, that's it?" she asked. He's really gone? I nodded, leaning back in my chair. For good. She exhaled, shaking her head. I still can't believe it. After everything, after all the lies and manipulations, he actually walked away without a fight. I tilted my head slightly, considering. Because there was nothing left to fight for. Garrett had built his identity on ambition, on carefully crafted illusions. But without a foundation, even the most beautifully constructed lie collapses. His business was gone, his reputation ruined, and his last desperate attempt to salvage something between us had failed. He wasn't a man fighting for redemption. He was a man facing the consequences of his own choices. And now, he would have to live with them. For the first time in weeks, I truly exhaled. The next morning, sunlight streamed through my windows, painting the walls in warm gold. I stretched, feeling the lightness in my chest. Today felt different. It wasn't just another day of damage control or preparing for the next move. It was the first day of the rest of my life. Downstairs, my father was already in his study, reviewing some documents. He looked up as I walked in, setting his glasses down. You seem at peace, he observed. I smiled. I think I finally am. He gestured for me to sit, a knowing glint in his eyes. You did well, Amelia, not just in handling Garrett, but in how you carried yourself through all of this. I met his gaze, appreciation swelling in my chest. I learned from the best. His lips curved slightly. You've always been strong, but now you know how to use that strength. I nodded, absorbing his words. Strength wasn't just about resilience. It was about knowing when to let go. And that, more than anything, had been my greatest lesson. We sat in silence for a moment before he leaned back, clasping his hands together. So, what's next? The question sat between us, heavy with possibility. I had spent so much time reacting, countering Garrett's plans, handling the fallout, ensuring that nothing he did could touch me again. But now? Now I had the chance to be proactive. I want to take a more active role in the company, I said finally. My father arched an eyebrow, intrigued. Oh? I exhaled, studying my thoughts. For so long, I let others decide my future. I thought I was making my own choices, but in reality, I was just following a script that wasn't mine. I want to change that. His eyes studied me, searching for hesitation. Finding none, he nodded approvingly. Then we'll start today. A spark of excitement ignited in my chest. This was it, not just reclaiming my life, but shaping it. That evening, I met Lena for dinner at a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. The sky was painted in hues of violet and amber, the world below buzzing with life. She leaned back in her chair, sipping her drink. So, student training, how does it feel? I laughed, shaking my head. A little terrifying, a little thrilling. She grinned. That sounds about right. We clinked glasses, a silent toast to new beginnings. As the city lights flickered to life, a sense of completeness washed over me. The past would always be there, but it no longer defined me. Garrett's deception, his ambitions, his downfall, none of it mattered anymore, because I had won. Not just against him, but against the doubts that had once held me back. Lena set her glass down, studying me curiously. If you could go back, before all of this, before the wedding, before you knew the truth, would you change anything? I thought about it, about the love I had once believed in, about the pain of betrayal, about the strength I had found in its wake. And I smiled. No, I said, because then I wouldn't be who I am now. Lena smirked. You really are the main character, huh? I laughed, the sound light and real. Yeah, I admitted it. And for the first time, I'm writing my own story. The city stretched before me, endless in its possibilities, and I was finally ready to step into the life that was always meant to be mine.